A reporter stood up at a White House press briefing and asked the President of the United States about Iranian attack drones in Cuba. That question would have been unthinkable at the start of this conflict, a conflict that began over a 21-mile strait at the eastern end of the Persian Gulf, over Iran's harassment of commercial shipping in international waters, had, by the morning of July 14th, reached the point where an American president was being asked whether the Islamic Republic has pre-positioned Shahed kamikaze drones on an island 90 miles from the Florida coast to strike the American mainland. Trump's answer: if they do have that, and they might very well have that, we'll take care of it. We're not going to have a problem. We're not going to allow that to happen. It could be that they're storing some. We're looking into it now. We'll figure it out fast. Read that answer carefully. It is simultaneously confident and uncertain. We'll take care of it in short order is the declarative, and we're looking into it now is the honest qualifier underneath the declarative. The president is telling the world that intelligence suggests the possibility of Iranian attack drone prepositioning in Cuba, while simultaneously acknowledging that the confirmation is still being developed. He is communicating a deterrence message. If it's there, we'll eliminate it, while acknowledging that the picture isn't fully clear yet. The Cuba dimension of this conflict is the development that, buried beneath the footage of 6 burning cities and waves of ballistic missiles and HIMARS launches from Bahrain, has received the least analytical attention relative to its strategic significance. And it is the development that must be treated with the complete seriousness its implications demand, because if the reports are confirmed, if Iran has actually pre-positioned Shahed-class autonomous attack drones in Cuba with the intent to strike American mainland targets, the conflict that began on February 28, 2026 over Strait of Hormuz shipping rights has undergone a geographic expansion that changes its character from a Middle Eastern military confrontation into something qualitatively different. But let's back all the way up, because to understand how a conflict over a 21-mile strait reaches the point where a president is discussing Iranian drones 90 miles from the American coast, you need to trace the escalation logic that has been operating since the beginning of this conflict and understand why the Cuba dimension, as alarming as it appears, is in fact the predictable endpoint of an IRGC doctrine that has always framed itself as operating on a global rather than regional scale. The IRGC's strategic doctrine has never been purely regional. It has always combined local coercion, in the Strait, against Gulf states, through proxy networks in the immediate neighborhood, with a global deterrence dimension that extends to the Western Hemisphere. The IRGC has maintained networks in Latin America for decades, leveraging relationships with Hezbollah's South American operational presence with governments whose hostility to the United States creates operational space for Iranian intelligence and military pre-positioning. Cuba, under its current government, represents precisely the kind of environment, geographically proximate to the American mainland, ideologically hostile to Washington, and structurally resistant to American intelligence penetration, that IRGC doctrine would identify as an ideal location for a deterrence pre-positioning operation. A Shahed-class drone positioned in Cuba is not primarily a weapon designed for operational effectiveness against hardened American military targets. It is a deterrence instrument. Its purpose is to hold American civilian and economic infrastructure at risk, to create the psychological and political reality that an American military escalation in the Middle East carries consequences that reach the American homeland. The IRGC's calculation, if the Cuba reports are confirmed, is that a president facing the political cost of Iranian attacks on American soil is a president whose domestic political environment creates pressure for de-escalation regardless of the military situation in the Strait. That calculation reflects the IRGC's consistent pattern throughout this conflict of attempting to generate political pressure on American decision-making through asymmetric threats rather than conventional military competition. The assassination plot against Trump was this doctrine applied to the apex of American decision-making. The Cuba prepositioning, if confirmed, is this doctrine applied to the American homeland itself. The IRGC, having failed to deter the military campaign through regional retaliation, is attempting to extend the deterrence reach of its remaining capabilities to the one geographic dimension that American domestic politics cannot easily absorb: the threat of attacks on American soil. Trump's answer, we'll take care of it in short order, is the deterrence countermessage. Whatever is in Cuba, if it is there, will be eliminated before it can be employed. The confidence of that message is real regardless of the uncertainty in the intelligence picture, because the operational capability to eliminate Shahed drones in Cuba is not in question. What is in question is only whether they are there and in what configuration. Now map the immediate military operational picture of July 14th, 2026, because the Cuba development does not exist in isolation. It exists on top of one of the most intense single operational periods this conflict has produced. During the 5-hour mission that CENTCOM formally described in its official statement, U.S. forces struck military targets across 6 cities simultaneously: Bushehr, Chabahar, Jask, Konarak, Abu Musa Island, and Bandar Abbas. The entire southern coastline of Iran, from the far southeastern port near the Pakistani border to the nuclear city on the northern Persian Gulf shore, burning in a coordinated multi-axis operation within a single 5-hour window. CENTCOM confirmed precision munitions employed against Iranian coastal defense systems, missiles, and drone sites across all 6 locations, and those 6 cities were not the complete picture of the overnight operation. Strikes were also confirmed at Saravan in the Sistan-Baluchistan province of the far southeast, a city that sits not on the coastline but in the Iranian interior, near the Pakistani border, in a location that tells you the operation's geographic reach extended beyond the coastal zone that has defined the primary American targeting logic throughout this conflict. 3 confirmed airstrikes hit Mahshahr in Khuzestan province. Mahshahr deserves more analytical attention than it has received in the coverage of this operation. Mahshahr is not a military installation in the conventional sense. It is the location of the Bandar Imam Khomeini Special Economic Zone, one of the largest petrochemical industrial complexes in the Middle East, a facility that processes and exports the chemical products that are central to Iran's industrial economic base. 3 strikes on Mahshahr represent, if the targeting was directed at the petrochemical infrastructure there, the most direct American military engagement with Iran's industrial economic capacity that this conflict has produced. Striking a petrochemical hub is not the same as striking an IRGC naval base. It is striking the physical infrastructure through which Iran's economy converts its natural resources into export revenue and industrial products. Cell coverage across Fars province was knocked out. The communications degradation that follows the systematic elimination of communication tower infrastructure is propagating into Iran's interior provinces, degrading the command and control architecture that the Iranian state uses to coordinate both military operations and civilian governance. More explosions were reported in Omidiyeh in Khuzestan province, again targeting an area with significant petrochemical and industrial significance in Iran's southwestern economic heartland. Kish Island, Iran's free trade zone, the special economic island that was intended to serve as Tehran's demonstration that Iran could attract international commerce and investment even under sanctions, was struck overnight. Fast attack boat infrastructure in the Kish port area is confirmed burning. Communication towers on Kish Island destroyed. The island that was supposed to represent Iran's commercial future is now a target on the American strike list alongside the IRGC's naval bases and missile storage sites. The HIMARS system in Bahrain, firing from Bahraini territory directly into Iranian targets, adds to the picture of multi-origin simultaneous fires that has characterized the current phase. Footage confirms the ground-launched tactical ballistic missiles ascending from Bahrain's territory, the host nation that was struck repeatedly by IRGC ballistic missiles earlier in this conflict, and that subsequently joined the active military coalition striking back. Bahrain as a HIMARS launch platform is the operational expression of that country's decision to transition from defensive posture to offensive participation. Multiple refueling tankers were observed overnight operating over Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE simultaneously. The logistical signature of a strike operation drawing on aircraft staging from multiple Gulf states, refueling from a tanker network distributed across the entire Gulf region to sustain the operational tempo through the 5-hour mission window. A tanker fleet distributed across 4 Gulf states is not supporting a single carrier strike group. It is supporting an operation whose aircraft are staging from multiple locations and require refueling support simultaneously from multiple orbital positions over the Gulf. And 50,000 American troops are now deployed in the region. That number, confirmed in CENTCOM's own statement, is the largest American military deployment to the Middle East in the current era of this conflict and provides the contextual scale within which the precision strike operations visible in the released footage are operating. 50,000 troops represent not just the air power and naval forces executing the strike campaign, but the logistics, the command and control, the intelligence support, the force protection, the medical capacity, and the full institutional infrastructure of American military power operating at sustained high-intensity tempo. Iran's response to the overnight strikes followed its established pattern, but with some operational details that deserve specific analytical attention beyond the standard ballistic missile launch footage. The IRGC conducted retaliatory ballistic missile strikes against U.S. military bases across Persian Gulf states. 4 ballistic missiles were launched simultaneously from a missile base in Bushehr province. The footage confirms the launch sequence. 4 consecutive vertical ignitions from the province that the American strike campaign has been repeatedly targeting. The Bushehr launches are notable for the timing. A province that has been struck continuously for days, whose airport has been hit repeatedly, whose IRGC naval infrastructure has been damaged, is still producing functional ballistic missile launches. The resilience of the dispersed mobile launch capability, the ability to launch from a province whose fixed infrastructure is degraded, confirms that the IRGC has maintained mobile launch capacity even as its fixed launch sites have been systematically eliminated. Additional launches were reported from Khorramshahr in southwestern Iran. And in one particularly significant detail, seconds after the second launch, a huge blast was heard near the launch site. The reports are unclear on whether the explosion represents an American counter-battery strike hitting the launch site immediately after the missile departed, which would represent a counter-launch timing capability of extraordinary precision, or whether the explosion represents a missile failure during its early flight phase. Either interpretation is operationally significant. Counter-battery fires that reach a missile launch site within seconds of launch confirm American strike aircraft maintaining persistent presence over Iranian launch areas with near real-time response capability. A missile failure during early flight confirms that the IRGC's ballistic missile maintenance and operational capacity continues to degrade. Iranian claims for this round of retaliation were extensive and specific. Strikes on HMS Bushehr facilities in Bahrain linked to U.S. Fifth Fleet fuel storage, strikes on Patriot radar systems, CRAM counter-rocket artillery mortar systems, early warning infrastructure, and arms depots. Claims of strikes on major U.S. bases in Jordan. Bahrain's government issued an official warning for citizens to remain indoors following confirmed missile launches aimed at the island kingdom. Blasts were heard in Jordan, unclear whether from Iranian missile impacts or from air defense interceptions. Read the specific Iranian targeting claims with the analytical care they require. The claim of striking Fifth Fleet fuel storage at HMS Bushehr is the most operationally significant claim in the entire list. HMS Bushehr, Naval Support Activity Bahrain, is not just the Fifth Fleet's headquarters. It is the logistics hub that sustains the carrier strike group operations that are executing the strike campaign against Iran. The fuel storage facilities at HMS Bushehr supply the JP-8 and other aviation fuels that fill the tanks of the Super Hornets, the Growlers, the Wild Weasels, and every other aircraft executing the overnight 5-hour mission. Striking the fuel logistics of the American air campaign would not stop it immediately, but it would impose a logistical stress on the operation's sustainment capacity that matters for any extended campaign duration. Whether Iranian missiles actually reached and damaged the HMS Bushehr fuel storage facilities, as opposed to being intercepted by the Patriot batteries, CRAM systems, and other air defense layers protecting the base, is not confirmed at the time of reporting. Iran has consistently claimed operational effects that subsequent damage assessment has not supported. The pattern of Iranian claims in this conflict has been one of dramatic announcement followed by American denials and subsequent evidence contradicting the Iranian claims. That pattern should be the default analytical framework for processing the Bahrain and Jordan targeting claims. But the specific targeting logic behind those claims deserves attention regardless of whether the strikes achieved their stated effects. The Iranian military is targeting logistics, fuel storage, and air defense infrastructure, the enabling systems that make the American air campaign sustainable. This is not the targeting logic of an institution attacking for symbolic effect. It is the targeting logic of an institution that has studied its adversary's operational dependency chain and is attempting to attack the nodes that would most constrain the American campaign's operational tempo over time. The analysis is correct even if the execution is failing to achieve the intended effects. The IRGC continued to strike commercial shipping overnight. One tanker was hit by a missile. The UAE Ministry of Defense confirmed 2 national tankers were struck by cruise missiles. 1 person killed, 8 more injured, identical casualties to the Mombasa and Al Bayas strike from earlier in the day. 3 ships total were hit by IRGC attacks during the overnight period, while the 5-hour American strike mission was underway simultaneously. Iranian fighter jets scrambled over Isfahan during the overnight operation. The scramble represents the last functional remnants of the Iranian Air Force attempting to demonstrate that the institution still has operational aircraft. But the operational reality of an Iranian fighter jet scrambling over Isfahan while American bombers and fighters are operating simultaneously across the entire southern coastal region from Chabahar to Bushehr is one of desperate gesture rather than tactical contest. The Iranian Air Force has not engaged American aircraft in this conflict. It has scrambled in reaction to American operations. The distinction between scrambling and engaging tells you everything about the actual state of Iranian air power in July 2026. 3 simultaneous pressure tracks as of July 14, 2026, have each expanded their geographic scope in ways that would have defined this conflict's outer boundaries at its start, and have now become the baseline condition of its current phase. The military track has expanded from southern coastal Iran to the Iranian interior, from petrochemical industrial hubs in Khuzestan to special economic zones on Kish Island to the far southeastern interior near the Pakistani border at Saravan. HIMARS fires from Bahrain represent the completion of a regional fire network that now covers Iranian territory from multiple launch platforms, using multiple munition classes simultaneously. The 5-hour simultaneous 6-city mission is not a peak operation above the previous baseline. It is the new baseline for what CENTCOM is executing as a matter of operational routine. The geographic track has expanded to the Western Hemisphere, and that is the dimension whose analytical weight the current coverage is most systematically undervaluing. If Iran has pre-positioned Shahed attack drones in Cuba, a claim that Trump is treating seriously enough to address at a press briefing and seriously enough to say will be handled, the conflict is no longer solely a Middle Eastern military exchange. It is a conflict in which American Homeland Security has been drawn into the operational picture in a form that no previous escalation sequence in this conflict has produced. The coalition track continues to expand. UAE is now confirmed as conducting active strike operations against Iranian territory. Bahrain is both a HIMARS launch platform and the target of Iranian retaliation simultaneously, conducting strikes while absorbing strikes. Saudi Arabia is crushing Houthi infrastructure in Yemen. Kuwait was an early entrant into the active strike coalition. The coalition arrayed against the IRGC now includes American, Bahraini, Kuwaiti, Saudi, and UAE military forces operating simultaneously across the Strait and in proxy network territory. The structural risk that deserves the most focused analytical attention on the morning of July 14th is precisely the Cuba question, because it is the risk that most directly threatens to transform this conflict's character in ways that cannot be reversed once the threshold is crossed. If IRGC Shahed drones are confirmed in Cuba, based in Cuban territory, positioned within range of American cities, airports, power infrastructure, and military installations, the United States faces a choice with no good options on any timeline. Allowing the drones to remain creates a persistent threat to American homeland security that no American administration can politically sustain. Eliminating them requires an operation in Cuban territory that raises questions about Cuban sovereignty and the Monroe Doctrine's application that have not been part of the operational calculus of this conflict to date. And the possibility that eliminating the Cuban pre-positioning triggers Iranian retaliation directly against American mainland targets using drones or other assets positioned elsewhere that American intelligence has not yet located creates an escalation scenario with geographic parameters that dwarf anything this conflict has previously encompassed. Trump's answer to the Cuba question was confident. We'll take care of it in short order. That confidence is the correct deterrence posture and the correct public communication about American intent. What it cannot tell you, what no public communication can tell you, is whether the intelligence picture is currently sufficient to identify and eliminate every prepositioned Iranian asset in the Western Hemisphere before any one of them can be employed. The 5-hour mission last night reduced 6 Iranian cities to smoke columns simultaneously. CENTCOM released the footage. The SAM sites are gone. The drone launchers are gone. The anti-aircraft positions are gone. The fast attack boats on Kish Island are burning on the waterline. And somewhere in a press briefing room, a reporter stood up and asked about Iranian attack drones in Cuba. The conflict that began over 21 miles of water between Oman and Iran has reached the question of what is stored 90 miles from Florida. The answer to that question, whatever the intelligence community is developing it in real time, will determine whether July 14th, 2026 is the day the conflict expanded beyond the Middle East or the day it was confirmed as still contained within it. Trump said, "We'll figure it out fast." The word fast is doing significant work in that sentence. The 5-hour mission burned 6 cities. The drones are still in the air. The ballistic missiles are still launching from Bushehr. And somewhere, in a place that might be Cuba or might be somewhere else entirely, something may be waiting that neither the 5-hour mission nor the HIMARS launches from Bahrain can reach from where they are. The Strait is still the center of this conflict, but its edges have extended further tonight than they have ever been before. The geography of the overnight strike operation deserves analytical mapping that goes beyond the 6-city list in the CENTCOM statement, because the additional confirmed locations, Saravan, Mahshahr, Omidiyeh, the strikes in Khuzestan province, reveal a targeting logic that has expanded from the purely military to the economic and industrial in ways that the previous weeks of operations did not clearly establish. Saravan sits in the Sistan-Baluchistan province of southeastern Iran, near the Pakistani border, at a distance from the Strait of Hormuz that removes it from the most direct geography of the maritime campaign. Striking Saravan tells you that the targeting chain is following IRGC assets wherever they relocate, that the dispersal and relocation strategy the IRGC has been using to protect mobile assets by moving them away from the coastal zones where American strikes have been concentrated is not providing the protection the IRGC intended. Whatever was in or near Saravan was identified, tracked, and struck at a location that the IRGC may have considered sufficiently distant from the primary conflict zone to provide operational cover. The 3 strikes on Mahshahr in Khuzestan province are the most strategically significant of the additional confirmed locations, and they deserve substantially more analytical attention than they have received in the coverage of the overnight operation. Mahshahr, properly Bandar Imam Khomeini, is not primarily a military installation. It is the location of the Bandar Imam Khomeini Special Economic Zone, which houses one of the largest concentrations of petrochemical industrial capacity in the Middle East. The complex produces polyethylene, methanol, ammonia, fertilizers, and a range of downstream chemical products that constitute a major component of Iran's non-petroleum industrial export economy. It is also located at the head of the core Musa waterway in Khuzestan, making it a significant port facility for the movement of bulk industrial goods. Striking Mahshahr 3 times in a single operation represents a qualitative expansion of the economic targeting logic that has been developing across this conflict. The Polak petrochemical refinery explosion in Loristan province destroyed a facility producing chemical inputs for weapons manufacturing. The Mahshahr strikes appear to target the broader petrochemical industrial complex, not just the weapons-relevant subset of petrochemical production, but the broader industrial capacity that sustains Iran's economic activity and export revenue. That distinction matters because it signals that the economic pressure dimension of the campaign has moved from the targeted disruption of weapons-specific supply chains to the broader degradation of Iran's industrial economic capacity. Whether that targeting decision reflects a deliberate policy choice to impose broader economic pressure on the Iranian state, or whether the specific Mahshahr targets were IRGC military facilities that happen to be co-located with civilian petrochemical infrastructure, is not something that can be determined from publicly available information. What can be observed is that 3 strikes on Mahshahr in a single operation, combined with the cell coverage disruption in Fars province and the strikes on Omidiyeh in Khuzestan, suggest a geographic and thematic expansion of the targeting logic that extends the campaign's economic pressure reach into regions and sectors that previous strikes had not clearly encompassed. The Kish Island strikes add another dimension to this economic targeting picture. Kish is Iran's free trade zone, an island specifically designated as a commercial hub that operates under relaxed regulations and with access to international commerce that the mainland's sanctions environment denies. Kish has hotels, shopping centers, international businesses, and has served as Iran's showcase for what the country could look like if sanctions were lifted and international commerce flowed freely. Striking Kish Island's fast attack boat infrastructure and communication towers is militarily justified by the IRGC's use of the island's proximity to the strait for naval operations. But it also eliminates whatever commercial and economic activity was still operating on the island. Another node in the Iranian economy's already degraded commercial infrastructure going offline. The pattern across Saravan, Mahshahr, Omidiyeh, Kish Island, and the disruption of cell coverage in Fars province is the pattern of a campaign that is no longer limiting its operational effects to explicitly IRGC military infrastructure, and is now producing economic and infrastructure effects across a broader geographic footprint of Iran than the previous weeks of operations established. Now, focus on what the Iranian retaliation's specific claim targets in Bahrain and Jordan tell you about the evolution of IRGC targeting doctrine, because those claims, even if not yet confirmed as having achieved their stated effects, reveal how the IRGC's strategic thinking about how to constrain the American campaign has been developing. The claimed targeting of HMS Jufair's fuel storage facilities is not a random choice. HMS Jufair is the logistical nerve center of the Fifth Fleet's operational capacity in the Gulf. Aviation fuel for carrier-based strike aircraft is a finite resource that must be maintained at the base, transported to the carrier, loaded onto aircraft, and consumed during each sortie. Disrupting that logistics chain does not stop the campaign instantly. The carrier has its own fuel reserves, and alternative fuel supply chains can be activated. But targeting fuel logistics imposes an operational friction on the campaign's sustainment capacity that compounds over time. An American air campaign that is simultaneously executing 5-hour multi-city strike missions and managing fuel logistics constraints operates under a different set of constraints than one operating without that friction. The claimed targeting of Patriot radar systems in Bahrain is similarly doctrine-driven. Patriot radar is the sensor foundation of the ballistic missile defense system that has been intercepting the vast majority of Iranian ballistic missile launches throughout this conflict. Destroy the radar, and the missile intercept capability goes blind. Missiles that would have been intercepted can now potentially reach their targets. IRGC ballistic missile targeting of Patriot radar is not attacking the defensive capability for its own sake. It is attempting to restore some degree of offensive effectiveness to a ballistic missile inventory that has been almost entirely neutralized by the intercept rate of the existing air defense architecture. CRAM, counter-rocket artillery mortar. Systems at Bahraini bases provide the last layer defense against slower-moving threats that Patriot is not optimized to engage. Claiming to target CRAM systems is claiming to target the defensive coverage that protects American and Allied personnel at the bases where the coalition is staging its air operations. Whether any of these claims represent actual hits or represent Iranian targeting ambitions that were intercepted before achieving their stated effects is the operational question that the battle damage assessment will eventually answer. What the specific targeting logic demonstrates is that the IRGC's shadow generals in the Strait of Hormuz are not simply firing missiles in retaliation. They are firing missiles at the specific nodes in the American operational infrastructure that their doctrine identifies as the campaign's most vulnerable elements. The Iranian fighter jets scrambling over Isfahan during the overnight operation is the detail that captures the state of Iranian air power in the most precise and revealing way possible. Isfahan, home to the Imam Khomeini Air Base, the location where Iran has concentrated its remaining functional combat aircraft, represents the last operational center of gravity for whatever Iranian Air Force capacity has survived the months of this conflict. Iranian fighter jets over Isfahan, scrambling in response to American strike operations that are simultaneously occurring over Bushehr, Chabahar, Jask, Konarak, Abu Musa, and Bandar Abbas, are not providing air defense coverage over any of those locations. They are flying over Isfahan, the F-4, Phantoms, and F-14. Tomcats and more modern Iranian aircraft that have not yet been destroyed on the ground are generating radar tracks over a city that is not being struck, while the cities that are being struck operate without any meaningful Iranian air defense from airborne interceptors. This is the complete picture of Iranian air power in July 2026, scrambling over a city that is not under attack, while every city that is under attack operates without air cover. The Iranian Air Force, as an institution capable of contesting American air supremacy in Iranian airspace, has ceased to exist as an operational entity in this conflict. The connection between the Cuba question and the IRGC's established operational doctrine illuminates why the reports deserve the analytical weight Trump's press conference answer implies. The IRGC has maintained a Latin American operational presence for decades through Hezbollah networks, through relationships with hostile governments, and through the Quds Force's global operations architecture. The Quds Force's operational history includes activities in Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Venezuela, and Cuba, activities documented in intelligence reporting and legal proceedings that have been unfolding for years before this conflict began. The prepositioning of Shahed drones in Cuba would not require building a presence in a region where no presence existed. It would require leveraging an existing presence and adapting it to a new operational purpose. The Shahed drones' relevant operational characteristics for a Cuba-based deployment are specific. The Shahed 136 has a range in excess of 2,000 kilometers in some reported variants. Cuba's geographic position places it within range of targets on the American eastern seaboard, in the Gulf of Mexico, and potentially reaching further depending on the variant and configuration. A cluster of Shahed drones prepositioned in Cuba is not an American existential threat, in the sense that nuclear weapons represent an existential threat, but a simultaneous mass launch of Shahed drones at American coastal infrastructure, commercial aviation facilities, or symbolic civilian targets would produce effects on American domestic political opinion that no military strike in the Middle East can directly generate. That is the IRGC's calculation if the Cuba reports are confirmed. Not military victory against the American military, political disruption of the American domestic environment in which the decision to continue the military campaign is sustained. A single Shahed drone reaching American soil and detonating produces political consequences that 90 IRGC ballistic missiles intercepted over Bahrain do not produce. The IRGCs, unable to win the military exchange, may be attempting to relocate the contest to the political domain of American domestic security in the way that the 9/11 attacks, however different in scale and nature, demonstrated that attacks on American soil changed the domestic political environment in ways that attacks on American forces abroad do not. Trump's response is correct in its deterrence framing and in its operational confidence. American capability to locate and eliminate Shahed drones in Cuba, whether through direct military action, through diplomatic pressure on Cuba, through intelligence operations, or through some combination, is not in question. What the Cuba dimension adds to the conflict's operational picture is a new category of complexity: the simultaneous management of a multi-city Middle Eastern air campaign, a naval blockade in the world's most critical energy waterway, a special operations force positioned off Oman, a five-nation coalition conducting active strike operations against Iranian territory, and now the possibility of Iranian attack drone prepositioning 90 miles from the American coast. 50,000 American troops deployed to the region, the single largest American military deployment to the Middle East in the current era. Every one of those 50,000 individuals represents not just the combat power they carry, but the institutional, logistical, intelligence, and command infrastructure that sustains them. 50,000 troops in the Persian Gulf region means field hospitals capable of handling mass casualty events, intelligence collection and analysis operations functioning around the clock, communications networks linking the carrier strike groups to the land-based command structure, to the Space Force assets, to the special operations forces positioned in Oman, and the full weight of American military institutional capacity brought to bear on a conflict that began over 21 miles of contested international waterway. The 5-hour mission burned 6 cities simultaneously, The ballistic missiles keep launching from what remains of the IRGC's Bushehr province infrastructure. The ships keep getting struck by cruise missiles fired from coastal rock formations. The refueling tankers orbit over 4 Gulf states through the night, sustaining the aircraft executing the strikes that are supposed to stop the missiles and the ships and the drones. And at a White House press briefing, a reporter asks about Iranian attack drones in Cuba. 4 ballistic missiles launched simultaneously from Bushehr province made it into footage before their trajectories could be terminated. Somewhere in Khorramshahr, a second IRGC launch was followed immediately by an explosion whose cause remains unclear, either a counter-battery strike of extraordinary precision hitting the launcher seconds after the missile departed, or the missile itself failing during its early flight phase. Either explanation confirms something the IRGC's shadow generals already know. Launching ballistic missiles from Iranian territory in July 2026 is increasingly an act of strategic desperation, rather than a viable military tactic. And somewhere that might be Cuba, or might not be, something may be positioned that the 5-hour mission and the HIMARS fires from Bahrain and the GBU-57 threat against Pickaxe Mountain are not designed to reach. We'll figure it out fast, Trump said. The word fast is doing the heaviest analytical work in this entire press briefing. The window between when a threat in Cuba is confirmed and when that threat can be activated is the operational variable that no press conference answer can quantify, but that the intelligence community is working to answer with extreme urgency. The 5-hour mission ended. The smoke is still rising from 6 cities along the Iranian coast. The missiles are still in the air. The blockade is active. The ocean trader is still moving. And somewhere at a press briefing podium, the question that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago has already been asked and partially answered. The war that started over a 21-mile strait is no longer contained within the geography that produced it. We'll figure it out fast. They had better.